Let me read you something. I'm working on a video essay about a gendered reading of this book because the way that women show up. Him and Sammy, his partner in crime, just got out of a hot robbery. Sammy's almost shot and killed, and his girlfriend is really fucking pissed about it. And she went for me, him, screaming and clawing. She knew I'd been in on it with him. I fended her off, not being able to figure out why Sammy didn't shut her up. I did. And from the corner of my eye, I saw Sammy going for his gun. Sammy's reaction that way to my hitting his woman, close as he and I were, was the only weak spot I'd ever glimpsed. So, two things. One, Malcolm X thinks worse of his partner for going to be violent towards him in defense of the black woman he just hit, that he thought he had impunity to hit because they were that close, and she was in hysterics. And secondly, I'm supposed to excuse this to follow his leadership.
This is it. This is exactly it. This is what I don't fucking understand about capitalists. They are always contradicting themselves. Capitalists will blame you for being poor, right? Because you're spending money on stupid shit that you don't need, but fail to understand that they rely on you buying stupid shit that you don't need because that's where they get their fucking profits from. It doesn't take a genius to figure out that economies do best when working class people have leisure money to spend to stimulate the economy. Because if literally the entire working class in the United States, just the United States, only spent their money on basic necessities and all their bills and nothing else, do you know how many fucking companies and entire industries don't fucking exist anymore? Companies like Disney, Starbucks, fucking Target won't exist anymore. Hey, rich people, if everybody's too poor to buy the stupid shit that you're selling, you don't make a profit anymore. Hello?
A groomer showed me incel sites like for.net back in 2005 to 9B for Reddit. Thousands of dudes would rant about wanting the government to force every single woman to marry them or go even planned out banning abortions, decriminalizing rape so they could force them to stay by keeping custody of the kid as leverage. Those people became politicians.
Art. This is bullshit. This is a work of art. This is bullshit. This is a work of art. But this is bullshit.
Couple weeks, I've been repeatedly reminded that a lot of my fellow leftists have an idea of revolution which is still primarily shaped by the way it is portrayed in popular media, which almost exclusively focuses on the fireworks aspects of revolution. And because of this, they think that a leftist revolution would also be primarily driven by violence. The problem with this is that in reality, capitalism has a limitless ability to tolerate violence. It expects it. It was founded upon it, and we cannot meaningfully challenge it solely by introducing more violence. As leftists, our goals are systemic in nature, and as such, our challenge to capitalism must also be systemic. To be clear, I am not trying to sell you liberal nonsense about how violence is never the answer. When it comes to oppressed people resisting their oppressors, violence is almost always an acceptable answer, and it would almost certainly have a part in a viable leftist revolution. But if we are doing it right, the source of that violence will be the ruling class when they realize that we pose a credible systemic threat to their power. And you can see this looking throughout history at leftist revolutions. The ones that have been able to get a foothold for any significant period of time have been the ones that have built this kind of power before the fireworks start. This is why when J. Edgar Hoover said that the BPP were the greatest threat to the security of the US, he was not talking about the fact that they open carried, he was talking about their free breakfast and medical clinic programs. A successful leftist revolution does not look like the end of Fight Club, where we watch the tall capitalist buildings crumble and suddenly we've arrived at communism. And I need y'all to understand this, because introducing violence before the systemic work is viable only aids right-wingers and fascists who are able to utilize violence much more effectively than we are as leftists, because they don't want systemic change. Capitalism suits them just fine, but what they do want is to normalize open violence against anyone who doesn't fit into their dominant socio-ethnic group. For them, violence is both a means and an end. This is a big part of why regime destabilization is such an effective tactic for the CIA, because they know that when things are destabilized, all they have to do is throw a little bit of funding at the right-wing group of their choice, and that group will be able to seize power. If you have been envisioning a revolution rooted primarily in violence rather than one rooted in building solidarity and improving people's material conditions, then you have not been envisioning a viable leftist revolution. You have been envisioning a revenge fantasy against capitalism. And I get that, I really do. But if we actually want lasting systemic change and to avoid sliding deeper into fascism, we need to be strategic and realistic about how we do that.
Starbucks is the perfect example of really good design. Look at the size and scale of the sign that hangs outside the shop. Then compare that to a sign like this. When you design around cars, you have to build signs at a very large scale. But when you design around people, you can build at the human scale. Human scale design is one of the factors that makes areas like this so pleasant to walk through. Walking through an area like this would be deeply unpleasant. And yet walking somewhere like this with all these human scale size signs would be very nice. Even a detail as small as signs makes an area more pleasant and walkable.
This alarming news story about a man who self-immolated, set himself on fire in front of the Supreme Court just a few days ago. And it's very possible that you didn't even hear about this because it didn't get much coverage. And the places that covered it, said that a man died after setting himself on fire, and that's all they said. CBS News, CNN, the New York Times, pretty much everywhere. But this man was a Buddhist and a climate activist, and he did this for a reason. He did this to call attention to the climate catastrophe that is ongoing. Now, there's a greater history here of practicing Buddhists doing this kind of very intense action to call attention to injustice. One of the most famous being Thich Quang Nuc, who did it in 1963. You can read about it. That was a huge story in 1963. That called attention to what was happening in Vietnam. News outlets in the US didn't even mention that this person was a climate activist.
Voice, as it sounds like I have been gargling gravel. But it's also, like, ultra sexy, so you're welcome. Please rate my fluffy boy, Snowman. Stupid name. This dog looks like he would play devil's advocate in a poli-sci course. Please rate my dog. His name is Jagger. I know it says Jagger, but I'm gonna say Jagger. Please, it's been years. Yep, it has been. Better late than never. This dog looks like he just found out that he has telekinesis. Millie Bobby Brown in Stranger Things. This is my dog. She is stretching. I feel like if I saw a dog do this, I would take it to the hospital. He looks like he is howling at the moon, but horizontally. Please rate my dog. This doesn't look like a dog. It looks like a costume that is vaguely dog-shaped. This dog sort of has the same vibe as Grimace. Like, I feel like if he was a mascot for McDonald's, it would make sense. Give him your worst. Or your best. It's your video, man. Well, what if I hit you with something straight down the middle? This cat looks so soft that if I were to touch it, my hand would just go straight through him. Please rate my dog, Bobby. Well, this is quite a cartoonish animal. I can't tell if this dog is a puppy or needs to be put down tomorrow. Hi! Please review my dog. His name is Lil Uzi. Lil Uzi is the perfect name for this dog. Although this dog does not look like a dog, he looks like a cryptid. There looks to be so much anger inside of such a small body.
Y'all know how strikes work? Obviously, they don't want you to know how to strike, so they don't teach us that in school. They love to talk about strikes and historical strikes, and we talk about strikes in the news, but I'm not sure if we know how strikes work. Your strike is not going to be effective if the only people who are striking are the people who can afford it. That's not how the strategy around the foundation of the philosophy of a strike, it's not how it works. There's actually not a big enough demographic of masses or working class people who can actually afford to strike long enough that it would be an effective strategy to actually push the state into what you're trying to get them to do. Because an effective strike can last upwards of months. And preparing for a strike, which sometimes can take, again, 6 months to a year and a half to actually prepare and stock up the resources that you need to actually go on strike, you have to have those already set up so the people who can't afford to go on strike can still go on strike. Oftentimes these are called strike funds, and it's a requirement so that people can last the war of attrition over time that it takes to actually be able to effectively run a strike. If you are in the demographic of people who can afford to strike right now, meaning that you have enough funds in your savings to probably be able to support yourself for, I would say 6 to 8 months actually, then actually one of the most effective things that you could do for the future would be to put that money aside in a group or community or collective strike fund for your local physical community. So you could help out others around you and not expect individuals to have to bring their own resources to a collectivist strategy. And the best way to actually do this is to build the interpersonal relationships with the individuals within community, and then the resources will come. The buildings, the water, it will come. You have to build the relationships first. And don't limit yourself to geographical locations. You can move all the people you want to the community y'all want to live in. It doesn't have to be the physical people around you right now. Effective strategy comes from not just knowing how and why it works, but having a purpose in action.
One of the oldest surviving ancient texts on surgery and medicine actually says that homosexuality is decided upon conception. The Sushruta Samhita is an ancient Sanskrit text from 800 BCE that says that homosexuality is determined when the sperm and ovum hit. As well as being the guidebook of Ayurveda, the text describes Prakriti, male, Stri Prakriti, female, Tritiya Prakriti, the third gender, Kliba, men attracted to men, Svarini, women attracted to women. The Sharira Sthana within the Sushruta Samhita is the chapter talking about all of this.
The narrative taught in every history class is demonstrably false and pedagogically classist. Don't you know the world is built with blood and genocide and exploitation? The global network of capital essentially functions to separate the worker from the means of production, and the FBI killed Martin Luther King. Private property's inherently theft, and neoliberal fascists are destroying the left, and every politician, every cop on the street protects the interests of the pedophilic corporate elite. That is how the world works.
If you feel bad right now, if you feel like you're living in hell, it's not you. It's because we're living in hell. One of the main blockages to social progress is people thinking that their response to things being awful right now is something that's wrong with them and not with the world. Unfortunately, there are a lot of people who have resigned themselves to dying smiling, and they insist on making everyone else feel the same way, as if focusing on the positives is going to change the fact that we're living in a dystopia. Anger and sadness, and yes, even depression in the right context, are not bad things. They are natural responses to external stimuli. And when there's a mass at a funeral for a victim of police brutality, yes, you should feel angry.
We don't live in a democracy. I think that the kicker is that not the whole point. Y'all love talking down to oppressed people when we point out the inherent flaws of the system and how, historically, change has only come when people get violent. That's why Martin Luther King said that the number one enemy to liberation was moderates, white moderates. Because y'all are more willing to fight for the presence of peace than you are to fight for the presence of justice. Y'all don't care that the status quo is already violent. Y'all don't care that under this system that you support so much, millions of people die and starve and go without necessary medical attention because of the system that we're in. None of that bothers you. Your problem is when people advocate against it using methods that have always worked in the past. Name one group of people who have voted for civil rights. I'll wait.
Can I talk my shit again?
You may have heard that the Founding Fathers warned against a two-party system in the United States. And I'm not usually a fan of these guys, but I am with them on this one. Because today, the US is in what experts call a two-party doom loop, where the Democrats and the Republicans have so much political control that you're forced to support them even if you don't like them. For example, in 2020, I voted for Joe Biden, not because I liked him, but because Trump was a worse option. And this happens all the time in the US, but it's not normal in other countries. In the United States, Congress is basically completely Democrats and Republicans. But this is the chart for England, and you can see that all the other colors down there are independent parties that are in Congress. So you can vote for the party you actually support without feeling guilty. The reason this doesn't happen in the US has to do with our voting system called first past the post and the way that we organize our districts. I'll talk about that in a future video. But America is not permanently screwed. As of 2022, a couple of states and a bunch of cities are using a new form of voting that gets closer to true representation. Follow along here and here for
Let's talk. Y'all love to worship at the altar of Black Panthers and Angela Davis, a strong, powerful Black queen. Well, get it right. It's the Black Panther Party. It was a political organization that organized within working class communities to fight for working class liberation. So this is a not so friendly motherfucking reminder that voting blue, no matter who, is not gonna do shit. It has not done shit. Reform is not gonna do shit. Yeah, there are symptoms that are very painful and we gotta alleviate those symptoms. But the disease is capitalism. We need our own political organizations, working class political organizations, if we are truly to be liberated. Just thought you should know.
You ever heard of the transgender man soldier who fought against slavery in the Civil War and was buried with full honors despite his identity becoming revealed? Let me tell you about the amazing story of Albert Cashier. Assigned female at birth, Albert Cashier enlisted as a man at the age of 19 years old in the Union Army. He survived up to 40 battles. He traveled with his regiment 9,000 miles without his gender identity ever becoming discovered. He even got captured by the Confederate Army and managed to escape. After the war, Albert Cashier would live the remaining 40 years of his life as a man. At the age of 71, he was hospitalized, and the hospital staff discovered his gender identity and forced him to wear a dress. His fellow soldiers, though, came to his defense and demanded better treatment. And when he unfortunately passed away, they demanded that he be buried under his chosen name with full military honors, which the military did respect.
Did Elvis Presley become famous by appropriating black music? Welcome to part 2 of my series on the history of cultural appropriation. Today we're talking about the so-called king of rock and roll. Now, Elvis Presley wasn't always the status he is now. Actually, when he started performing in Las Vegas, he was considered boring and a flop. But then his career exploded when he recorded a version of Big Mouth Thornton's song Hound Dog. Actually, throughout his career, he copied black dances and songs, including Baby Let's Play House by Arthur Neil Gunter, Otis Blackwell's Don't Be Cruel, and Lloyd Price's Loudy Miss Cloudy. But he was just doing covers, right? So what's wrong with that? In reality, it wasn't that innocent. His producer, Sam Phillips, who some call the man who created Elvis, literally said, "If I could find a white man who had the Negro sound and the Negro feel, I can make $1 billion." Elvis's entire brand was built on the intentional appropriation of black culture, and he received fame, acclaim, and money that these black artists never saw. Now, the black artists are largely forgotten, while a white man became the face of a genre created by black American. Follow for part 3, we'll look at the Beatles.
The facts you might not know. Mount Rushmore. Before the president's faces were carved into Mount Rushmore, it was called the Six Grandfathers, part of the sacred Black Hills of the Lakota people. The U.S. government seized the land illegally in 1877, after gold had been discovered there. President Grant secretly ordered the army not to protect local tribes, as bounty hunters collected up to $300 for each Native American killed. The carving of 4 presidents into the hills took place in the 1920s.
Visit Black Hills in South Dakota, you'll probably come across Mount Rushmore, the famous monument built on stolen indigenous land. But 17 miles away, there's a bigger monument, commissioned by a Lakota chief. This is the Crazy Horse Memorial. Crazy Horse was a 19th century Lakota war leader, notable for his battles against U.S. settlers and their encroachments on Lakota territory. In 1939, Henry Standing Bear, a Lakota chief, wrote to sculptor Korchak Jolkowski, who helped carve Mount Rushmore, and commissioned him to build the Crazy Horse Memorial, saying, "My fellow chiefs and I would like the white man to know that the red man has great heroes too." Korchak moved to Black Hills and started work on the monument in 1948. After his death in 1982, construction continued and is still going on to this day, thanks to his family and with private funding through the Crazy Horse Memorial Foundation. While there is some opposition to the memorial from members of the Lakota tribe, the Crazy Horse Memorial is open to paying visitors. Once completed, it will be the second largest sculpture in the world, all in an effort to honor indigenous history, heroes, and heritage. So that's kind of interesting.